The whole world is sick.
Are you worried about America? I am.
Believe the impossible and you can do the incredible.
Welcome to another episode of The Catholic Patriot. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Howard, and I'm the founder of the Fulton Sheen Institute. And I'm very happy to have our guest today, Father Nathan Cromley of the Community of St. John, joining us from Denver, Colorado. Father Nathan and I have done a lot of projects in the past when I lived in Colorado, in particular Aspen. He's an extraordinary priest with many, many talents and extraordinary, I would say, really extraordinary preaching gifts and teaching gifts. He is the founder of the St. John Institute, which is in Englewood, just outside of Denver. And he also has, he's the founder of Eagle Eye Ministries. And our history kind of goes back, I say, quite a ways, even before he was ordained a priest. And he brings a lot of wisdom and light wherever he is, and a passion for the gospel, a passion for souls, and really a passion for today's subject, where we're going to be talking about leadership and Catholic entrepreneurship, which is really at the heart of his St. John Institute. So I want to welcome Father Nathan to our podcast. Welcome, Father.
I'm honored to be here, Dr. Howard. Thank you very much. It's been a long journey together, and it's nice to see you again.
Great. Well, Father, I'm going to jump right into things here because I cherish the time that we have. And I focused on leadership for this podcast because I think that's probably one of the greatest crises that we have, is this crisis in leadership. You talk to Catholics, it's always lamenting, what are the bishops doing, what are the priests? Now, this is not like, oh, let's put them on the hot seat, but we do have a crisis in leadership. And since this is a big focus of what you do with the St. John Institute, and really, I think, a big inspiration behind that, give us your thoughts, kind of how did we get to where we are today with this whole picture of leadership?
Well, you know, the idea of a free market economy is that it generates a free market culture. A free market culture is that values that whoever wants to put their values forward can. And if you have a free market economy, those values are going to be predominantly aimed and oriented towards the consumption of the goods that are being offered. And so once you recognize that, and you recognize that capitalism in some form or another is the dominant form, economic form throughout the world, even if it's limited in different socialistic outcomes or orientations, the foundation is that we need to be able to assert ourselves if we're going to be heard. When we are Christians, either we step up and make that assertion of our values and make ourselves heard, i.e. become leaders, or we become relevant and we fail in the missionary impulse that Christ gave us when he sent us into the world to evangelize. So if you think of evangelization as requiring leadership, I think it becomes obvious to see the value that leadership has and the importance that we have to hone it, to study it, to develop it, because otherwise you can't evangelize. And I would even say this, you can't parent. I don't know how you can claim to be a parent today if you're not a leader. You can't teach, you can't run a business, you can't do anything that's effective in our world today unless you're willing to assert yourself in an influential manner, and that's at the heart of leadership.
It's interesting too. I remember conversations that we had even before you founded the St. John Institute, and you know, this whole movement of kind of basically seeing where the world was going. And you know, here we are looking at a monk, and he's talking about this, you know, super active evangelization and leadership, and it really seems to go at the heart of what whatever we're doing today. And I find that the St. John Institute is a big blessing for that. Give us a little bit of the background of that, because here you are as a religious brother. You founded an institute on leadership. What was the main inspiration that said, I got to do this? Of course, you got to present it to your community and all that, but, and get that confirmation. But what was the big inspiration to found an institute that focuses on this leadership and Catholic entrepreneurship?
Believe it or not, it's buried deep in the French countryside, where I lived in silence and solitude, studying St. Thomas Aquinas, reading Aristotle, praying for 4 hours a day, in a very monastic kind of environment. And even though we're not monks, I mean, we are religious friars active in our apostolates, our formation is very monastic in its basis. And there, what did I discover? Absolute and total gift of self in order to help and lift up your brothers and sisters in the world. And I lived so intensely 24/7 without a break, in a way that's completely integrated, where every aspect of your life is focused on that goal to give yourself in union with Christ for the salvation of the world. And all I simply did is, as I read all those concepts and these books that are behind me, I realized that this was what the world was looking for. And fundamentally, I came across the foundational intuition for my work, and that is that there is an intersection between sanctity and leadership. That grace summons leadership. Grace calls for leadership in order for it to be fulfilled. So, where it happened as time went on, I had that going on inside my mind. I met young adults who were going to leave the Catholic Church, even though they went to daily Mass. And I said, why in the world would you leave the Catholic Church if you're going to daily Mass and praying the rosary in your family? And they simply said, why should we stay? And I remember that conversation so clearly, because I realized that moment, that our greatest talent and the ones who were well formed weren't being convinced of the value, meaning our church was not showing them in an assertive leadership way why she exists herself. And so our young adults were abandoning ship because the ship didn't believe in them. And I just said, that's when I've got to start to do something. So I stepped in, I created Eagle Eye Ministries, to young adults on fire, and then that progressed and developed because the young people would go on retreats, and then they would talk about the real world on the other side of the retreat, and it was almost like they would suddenly discount all the value that they'd gotten of the Mass and of the friendships and of the fellowship and the classes that they'd gotten, because the real thing had to get a job, and in the real world there were things that were really worth achieving. Whereas, we Catholics were just this kind of nice womb where people could rest and fall asleep. And I didn't want that, because that's not the truth. But to do that, I needed to convince them and show them how all of the fire that's present in the Eucharist and in adoration and in prayer and in silence is actually poured out and fed by an active mission in the world. And that's when I decided to start the St. John Leadership Institute, with our goal being to create these innovative leaders who take the tradition and the prayer and then put it towards evangelization and impact. And then with time, as I did that, I saw the great need in our world of business, small business owners, small companies, especially entrepreneurs, to hear the message of sanctification, because so many Catholic professionals find themselves in a situation where they're giving their energies, but they're guilty about it. They're like, this has nothing to do with my faith or my family. And I'm like, absolutely not. It all has the same heart. Family, faith, and business or professional life all stem from the self-gift, which is the place of the Christian message. And it happens at the same time be the core of leadership.
I've listened to you speak many times on leadership over the years, and it's been interesting because I find that similar to the patron of our institute, the Fulton Sheen Institute, Venerable Fulton Sheen, there's always great value when you're looking at examples, not just within, let's say, the Catholic Church, but there are great leaders around the world. There are great leaders in history. And there's things that we can be drawing from because there's common traits. Um, what would you say would be, I am putting you a little bit on the spot here, but the three most important marks of the leaders that we need today? I know that's a big one, but I mean, you can kind of go anywhere with that, but let's maybe just kind of say, well, go ahead. I'll let you take it.
Number one, optimism. Number two, grit. And number three, wisdom. And
Wisdom.
I develop those if you want. The situation today is one where you got to be ready to be new and to be unaccepted in a world full of criticism. The American culture is, in my humble opinion, dying. I don't think it's moribund. I'd like to resurrect it, but at the same time, it's dying. It's in a decline because people are satisfied with what they have achieved and are no longer driving forward. In such a climate, a leader will always be criticized by people who say that he can't or she can't. The number one attitude the leader has to have is optimism. Absolutely, we can. We can do it. People are surrounded by forces that seem bigger than them. And so those same forces discourage, and you feel like there's nothing we can do. You can't lead if you're not convinced that you can get there. And that's where most of the problems are. Second thing is grit, because believe it or not, in a world of comfort and ease, innovation will cost you a big price. If you really want to make an influence and you really want to assert yourself, you've got to buy the ticket. And that's going to require a ton of grit, because the bar of entry is very high. You have to have your website and your CRM and your staffing and your funding and oh my goodness. Before you know it, no one wants to start anything. Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have to climb a mountain. You can let other people dominate the culture around you if you're not a Christian. But if you're an agent of Jesus Christ, I got news for you. He didn't say it was going to be easy. He asked you to rise and meet the challenge, and that requires grit. And then the third is wisdom, and that's quite simply because the structures that are dominating our world and society today are not, unfortunately, in full accord with the gospel. There's a lot of positive things that are there, but there's a lot that isn't. And we have to be able to think beyond outside of books, not just in terms of like practical things, but in terms of the trajectory of our lives. The Bible says it this way: the world is driven by the love of money. Well, we're not driven by the love of money. That's what I mean by wisdom. That means that, hey, we're playing holding the game. I mean, God bless money. It's a wonderful thing. And, if you love it, I mean, it's whatever. But we Christians are not driven by the love of money. We're driven by the love of God. And that's going to make us have a different perspective and way of ordering what's truly important in life from anyone else. And so you cannot lead in the modern context unless you have that wisdom. If not, you'll be following someone else. I'm just doing another business, doing another thing, instead of understanding why. So optimism, grit, and wisdom, I would say, are the three you need today. And thanks for asking. I've never been asked that question. That's a great question. Questions like that.
Well, leadership is a big part of what we're doing here with the Fulton Institute and growing. I mean, the world of coaching is expanding, and we realize too the importance of having mentors, coaches, people who can really guide us through. I mean, all the greats in everything. Tom Brady. I mean, when these guys have really nobody better than them, all of these guys have a coach, someone to guide them through all of these things, and it's and it's forming their character, it's forming their skills, it's forming their mindset, it's doing all those kinds of things. So it's such an important thing to kind of see, well, what are the marks that we Catholics should be looking at? And also because I think Catholics seem to have a narrow view of leadership as well. You can kind of go one extreme to the other. One is, it's sort of like Luther. His biggest problem was one word: sola gratia, sola fide. It's like only, and Catholics kind of interpret that like, well, leadership, well, just God's going to lead me. I mean, of course, I just trust in God, and whatever comes my way, I'm just going to embrace it as His will. And if I really desire something, well, it probably isn't God's will because it's not my will, but His will be done. But I'm not quite sure what it is, so I'm just going to roll with it. And then it really just seems like an endless cycle or just a dragging out of mediocrity, And then I go online and I just see tens of millions of views of powerful influencers, people that you are very familiar with as well, the Simon Sinek's. You've got people that I really enjoy listening to. I mean, because you talk about positivity, just listening to them could take what I feel inspired to do and give me that confidence and say, okay, I have to have self-belief rather than just belief in God. And so that kind of leads into my question. What is the value, or what can we learn, or what have you learned from those who are big, powerful influencers in the secular world? That the church, if they could adopt some of these things and combine it with what you're talking about, that wisdom and that ultimate orientation and aim to God, could really make the powerhouse leaders that we need.
Well, what I'm going to say might surprise you. I think it'll surprise the viewers, but I love to say it, and that's that business purifies spirituality. And I think that you can learn a lot as a Christian about how to live in the light of Jesus Christ by looking at really basically pagan secular people. And here's why. The ones that are successful have learned that failure is an option, meaning that it's okay to fail. It's just not okay to quit. Right? And you got so many Catholics that are like, well, I did drugs. Oh, I lost virginity. Therefore, I washed up. And our fellow Catholics look at people who've gone through divorces or who have gone through terrible things in their life or who have failed because they're alcoholics, whatever, and we look down on them. And we say, oh, that person, we're going to cancel them. They have no right to speak about Jesus. What do they know? All this kind of stuff. We have a type of over-perfectionism that the world doesn't hold to itself. The world holds almost more Christian value of regeneration and rejuvenation than we do. And I think this is a terrible thing. I think mercy ought to be proclaimed through the lives of sinners who show us that Jesus gives us a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance. So that's one thing I learned from them. The second thing I learned from them is that they're willing to play the long game. I mean, when you look at the hours that these musicians spend practicing, and then how they sacrifice and the things that they go through in order to climb that ladder, whereas we expect, today, I've got a talk and then no one wants to listen to it. Well, are you willing to pay the price? Those people were, and you can say all you want about them, but one thing you can't say is that it was easy. It's okay that it not be easy. And one last thing about that I see and that can help us as Christians is that they seem to love what they do. And I think I'm a big fan of smiles because I think that our world needs smiles because we Christians act like somehow or other we're going to fail, which is why we end up failing. So, I mean, you can't do that. If you're an entrepreneur trying to make money, you've got to believe in yourself, believe in what you're doing, and get out there and hustle, pay the price, take the long game, and in order to win, and then no failure. There's a saying in business where they say fail fast. I think that's a great idea. Well, it's the same thing, and if we take that into our spiritual lives, we have 3 wonderful spiritual lessons that we could adapt in our marriages, in our families, in our own personal journeys. It's okay to fail, it's just not okay to quit. That it's okay to take the long game, let's be strategic about this and not expect an easy success. And then whatever we do, for heaven's sakes, let's enjoy the journey. Earth is not just a valley of tears. It's also a place of incredible joys if we let love into our hearts.
That's well put. I think what you said in the beginning too is Catholics wouldn't generally make that connection between value and principles of business as a reflection of, even our own Christian journey. But that actually makes sense because everything in this world is analogous to Christ himself and our life. We just don't want to quite see it like that. And I always bring this up what Fulton Sheen would say too. He says, when the church drops something, the world picks it up. And so we find that when the church loses these kinds of extraordinary, really human formation values, it eventually gets picked up by the world. And in many cases, there's extraordinary things that they develop themselves. I mean, look at the kind of leaders and the people that, tens of thousands will follow these people that are out there because they're looking for purpose. They're looking for someone to tell them that they can dream. They're looking for someone that says you actually can do it. Now, yes, they can go to extremes and, they'll walk on hot coals or something. And if you don't, then your mindset isn't right. I mean, I don't know. But there's, these people, the Jordan Petersons of today, these people are resonating. You look at views and what people are, the trends of things, and their messages are rather simple, but these people are stepping up as leaders because they're hitting that heart, that woundedness that John Paul II saw, Fulton Sheen saw, as really being kind of a springboard for how you're going to reach people today. With all the people that you have reflected and studied, whether they be in the church and throughout history or in the secular world, who are your favorite, most inspirational leaders?
Wow, that's a really hard question for me.
Not St. Thomas Aquinas, not Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
Now, you can say whoever you want, but as far as maybe somebody who has such an impact in what you now teach or whatever. But anyway, I'm throwing that out there.
Would you like secular or Catholic? Which one would you?
I would like either. If they're all secular, that's fine. But somebody may say I like General Patton because and sometimes it's hard. It's hard to find, at least from my perspective, unless you're really analyzing leaders sometimes in the church, because they're not presented as such. They're like, God appears in a bush and he chooses Moses. Oh, okay, well, Moses kind of steps up. And then you can look at the life of Moses, and I know you've done that with your leadership group. But as far as the kinds of leaders that you look at our culture today that we need to stand up or I should say rise, I find myself really inspired more by the secular people that are out there, like a Les Brown. I don't know if you know who he is, but his story is really inspiring, from absolutely nothing to becoming one of the most influential speakers in the world. And I'll listen to something that he'll do, and it'll galvanize me for what I'm doing for the Fulton Sheen Institute, because he's saying what I need on that human level, and I combine that to it's an act of supernatural faith that I'm doing, but I absolutely need this other part, because that's where I fail. I'd say 95% of the time is in all the human elements. So wherever you want to draw from.
Sure. I think from a secular point of view, a guy who really inspired me is Theodore Roosevelt, because he lost his mother and his wife on the same day, and then went out west and discovered the freedom of masculinity and masculinity, and then went back to become the president of the United States. I find that story amazing. I find his outlook amazing, his humanity, his ability to be with normal folk and relate to them. But I think of people who really inspire me. Junipero Serra, the great saint of California, blows my mind. He left his home at 31, everything behind, including a PhD in theology, became a missionary in Mexico, and then at age 54 began to found 9 cities along the western coast. In the last 17 years of his life, he walked 24,000 miles. You can do the math on what that makes. He's literally walking around the world. And what amazes me about him is that he went where there was nothing, and he left Christ behind him. Another extremely motivating character for me is St. Damien of Molokai, for much the same reason. He went where there was nothing, and they saw the invisible, and they did what was necessary to build where there was devastation. So, those 3 figures for me, are pretty neat and tied together. John Paul II, you can't help but be inspired by him and what he went through. In fact, he was an orphan, and his culture was taken away from him. I guess maybe I watched too many Disney movies when I was a kid, but I love the rags to riches tales of the great heroes who go out and make it happen, where there's nothing before them. And I think that's what we need today. Honestly, the reason it inspires me is because folks, we have got to be able to go where there's nothing. when I see the church and people in the church closing their minds to the modern world and writing it off as if dead, I respect their decisions and whatever they want to say, but I'm not going to be part of it. The world's not dead. The modern world is able to be evangelized. Why? Because that's my job. I'm not going to be able to go to the Lord and say, hey, Lord, you know what? I didn't do my thing. Because you know what? It was just impossible. The people, like, what don't you believe about the Lord and the resurrection? And when I say that, I sound impudent or I sound naive or I sound whatever to a lot of folks. I really don't care. I care what Jesus is saying about me. And the Lord told us to be a salt of this earth and a light in this world. And that means I've got to adapt my mind to say, where there is no hope, I have to bring that hope. Like Damien, like Juniper Sarah, like so many saints before me, and go into the modern problematics and bring that light of the gospel. At least that's what we're all about at St. John Institute.
That's awesome. Well, why don't you give us a little bit more about the St. John Institute, because you have this Catholic formation and philosophical formation, spiritual formation, married to a formation that leads the students to be getting and earning an MBA, for business. Well, tell us about that, and what's the ultimate purpose that you have with combining those two for these students? Like, what do they expect by the time they leave within, I think it's 2 or 3 years?
I'm kind of an extreme Peter, so like I figure I'm going to be dead in 30 years. I want to make as big an impact as I possibly can. I want to swing for the fences. So that means that you go, it's like Thomas Aquinas says, the most universal is the simplest, right? And so what is the simplest aspect of all leadership? Engagement. So what I've done is I've tried to solve the 1-inch gap, that's a trademark, between potential and action. And that 1-inch gap found in your marriage, found in your family, found in your business, is everywhere the same. And what I've done is I've taken St. Thomas Aquinas and the Bible, and I've distilled them into a methodology to help in each of the 4 major contexts of leadership the individual to assert themselves positively across that 1-inch gap. And so we have a whole host of programs to do that. And then we have programs that lead up to it, like our Eagle Eye program, or a date with, we call it a date with Father Nate, thing, a date night, things that lead into it. And then we have the actual training in those programs. And then we have the applications that go throughout in communities where people are able to have their peers supporting them as they continue to live this inspirational life called Daring to Lead. So we're very much in our beginning stages of things. We're going to be developing this as we go. But when you think, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to make the biggest bang by bringing the gospel into every aspect of our lives. Wherever there is that, how would you put it, the bridge to cross between what I can do, what needs to be done, and the actual engagement of my talents and my capacities in doing it.
We hear a lot in the world of formation, personal development, and professional development about the importance of your mindset. You're almost like your mindset is everything. And I kind of hinted at it already in the sense that Catholics sometimes overlook that because, well, it's just as long as my spiritual life, I'm praying my rosaries, that's all fine. But in this kind of formation, this integrated kind of formation, and in somebody who's so well trained in philosophy as well and aware of what is being taught out in these spheres of personal development, what can you tell us about the importance of the formation and the training of our mind? Like, where does that play in all of this? Because my experience has been Catholics just kind of push that aside because they're like, oh, you're getting into whatever, hokey stuff and, the power of positive thinking or whatever it may be, or they're afraid it's going to go into something else. But it's like, that's really where the entire battle is, Like I said before, that's for me, when I look at the struggles that I have, it's not praying my rosary, my life of consecration to Mary and making acts of faith and all that. It comes down to the kinds of things where the battle in my mind, my own image of myself, my own confidence, and And then Catholics kind of get this guilt trip of, well, I shouldn't even be thinking about that because now I'm just talking about myself, and that's just egotistical. And somebody who's involved in formation, how can you address that for us, that the seeming conflict?
Peter, I'm going to sound glib, but it's kind of like, try to do it some other way. The problem I have with those type of folks that say, kind of like, well, all of that is New Age or those human development, it's not Catholic, is that they're not doing anything. Try to parent kids knowing that you're a bad parent without focusing in on the positivity that you can gain from listening to Mozart when you wake up in the morning. You won't be able to do it. We have a human nature that is assumed by grace. And that human nature is such that all of our actions flow from ourselves. So as you see yourself, so you will be able to give yourself away. And so the positive of the mindset, for example, is right there. If I don't think I can make it to the top of the mountain, I'm not going to try. If I need to get to the top of the mountain, therefore, the first thing I need to do is convince myself that I can do it. Otherwise, you won't do it. So I kind of had enough, because that way of thinking that people have where they disdain the human element of sleep, of good moods, of treating yourself well, of positive thinking, of letting go of negativity, of dressing for success, of having a decent house to live in with decorations that you actually like, of having a standard of living that supports. You can't be a brain surgeon and not have the comfort that you need to rest after surgery. Can't do it. Well, you can't be a leader in today's world unless you feed that confidence by a lot of human rules. So I would just say to anybody, go ahead and try. I just like to see the great thing that you can dare when you don't care about yourself. The fact is, our Lord said, love your neighbor as yourself. And so I have to take that human aspect into account. And it's the same thing if you look at your own life, what most Americans are missing, unfortunately, is an understanding of the value of hard work and the way that work structures a human individual. I say this all the time to parents, and I'll say it out loud for you today. I think parents should make their kids work. They should make sure their kids get a job. It's just essential for the structuring of who they are. And then grace. Can you imagine if Jesus were to call a hardworking son of a gun into his vineyard instead of some pansy? Why is Jesus only calling pansies? Well, I don't know. It's love for me. I'm not, who's going to do the hard work of building that church, funding the thing, stretching themselves to new employees, figuring out how to solve the media question, getting in front of young people? A hardworking son of a gun is. Well, then we need to focus our energies there, even without neglecting the focus we need to have on grace and on spirituality. But I'm tired of seeing an ineffective spirituality. I'm tired of seeing saints feeding on the Eucharist and then wondering, what are we going to do about how we promote God's plan for marriage? It's impossible. We'll be canceled. I'm like, you're feeding on the Eucharist, people. Do you realize what you're eating? You're eating the firepower of God. He has enough within him to figure out, are you willing, though, to make that journey? And finding a lot of people aren't. A lot of people are like, no, someone else will, Jesus will, I don't know what. I don't know, may God bless them all. I know I'll be judged by Christ if I don't dispense my energies to the full, figuring out how to evangelize in today's culture, and that takes a lot of humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's one of the largest vocation within Catholics is discernment, the vocation of discernment, and they just never make it a choice because they don't know for sure, is this what I want? Is this what God wants? And I always tell people, look, if you really want to be obsessed with knowing what God wants, the only state in life that gives you that more than anything else is religious life, because you absolutely know if you're told to do something in your community, that's what God wants you to do. The rest of us, we work within the parameters of the commandments and the moral life and all that other stuff, but we have to really take full responsibility for our life and our choices. And I think this may be the motto of the St. John Institute, but it's dare great things for Christ. Well, that's a statement of ownership. You're daring great things. You're making this choice. Our Lady most likely did not appear to you. You did not have a burning bush, but you've had to make that choice. And I think that initial step toward that, maybe the first centimeter within that inch gap of all that, is really that hardest part. And what advice can you give for those who feel paralyzed and like, well, I don't really know, and I need more time. I need another retreat. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And then I'll do something great, but I hope it's what God wants, and I hope it's not the wrong thing. And my spiritual director doesn't really help me. I'm like, because I don't think it's a spiritual director's choice.
Peter, like, allow me to be a bit of a father, right? And just, kick these people in the rear ends, because it's like, this is where you become Christian. If you're not walking on the water when Jesus called you on the water because you're afraid of the wind and the waves, then I want you to stop criticizing Simon Peter and saying he didn't have faith, right? Because you don't have faith. You will always be afraid when you're a Christian, because you are being stretched and put into a place that is difficult and scary. I'm sorry, but like, one of the things that you're put in the place of is, how do I know it's God's will? You don't. You don't. How do you know it's God's will? You don't. Do you trust in his mercy? Are you willing to make a mistake? Or do you think that your God is going to somehow cast you into hell for trying really hard? So we talk about mercy, we pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet, but in the end, we don't want it, right? We would rather have our lives completely secure and knowing what God's will is. Well, good luck. I mean, when you know, please tell me. Because in the meantime, we are souls to save. Teresa Calvert, she didn't have an assurance when she was doing God's will, and yet she did it anyway. And I brought out this big book, which I'm kind of like fond of showing off here. This is the Summa Theologica in Thomas Aquinas, because sometimes people say that doesn't sound very Catholic. And I'm opening up, just as a matter of show for, in the first part, question 104, it's 105, or Article 4. This is where it is, just in case people doubt. I don't know if I can see it or not. There it is, right there. What Thomas Aquinas says is, God will move your will in 3 ways. Number 1, by being its ultimate object. You can't get around that. All of us are seeking God all the time. So he's like, no matter what, everybody is seeking me. Second, he gave you a will. So that's already kind of cool. Like, how do I have this will to begin with? God gave you the capacity to desire. So he's functioning by creating the will. And the third thing he does is he inclines. It's the beautiful word, inclinator. He inclines, he tips the scales of that will towards what he wants for you. But that is the scary part, because that means that I have to be able to accept that my will, which might be wrong, might be twisted, might be darkened, all of those things is where I have to go in order to find God's. So I pray to God for signs, etc. But in the end, God, I am responsible for following what I'm responsible for. And that means that the real conversion has to happen is I have to be willing to walk in faith with myself. And so that doesn't mean that God doesn't give signs. It doesn't mean you shouldn't pray. Obviously, all of that. But the way that God will move you is by finding your will to will what he wills for you. And so you have to listen to the various levels of your will and understand that, yeah, up here I'm scared and I don't want to do it, but deep down I know this is where I got to go. Well, okay. That's the whole journey of spirituality, but you can't get around it. It's right in Thomas Aquinas. So I would say to folks, when it comes to asserting yourselves, be not afraid is a serious challenge and a serious opportunity for conversion. Be not afraid to dare something great for Christ. Because, my goodness, if you don't, you won't. As long as you stay content to give an excuse. I don't know what's happening with trafficking of children around the world. I don't know. That's a thing. Oh, you're going to be willing to do nothing. And if you're gone the last 20 years in your life and you haven't done anything because you're afraid of doing anything, then you've gone 20 years of your life and you have done nothing. Every choice is a choice, including the choice to not make a choice. That's a choice. And so you're kind of stuck because then you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? You're supposed to move forward with trust in his mercy, be willing to pivot and change course, like Nathan told David. Nathan the prophet told King David said the temple. Nathan the prophet says what? He says, go and do it. The Lord is with you. Even though it was wrong. So God appeared to Nathan in a dream and said, Nathan, you got that wrong. So he went back to David and said, I got that wrong. You're not supposed to build a temple for the Lord, right? That's kind of a great example. Well, but in the first thing Nathan says is, the Lord's with you. If you want it, do it. Right? That's my kind of word for Christians today, too. You'll find out what God wants after you try, instead of waiting forever to get some sort of sign. Mary didn't know if she was supposed to swaddle the baby. It didn't swaddle the baby. How did Mary know that Joseph really had a dream and that he was really supposed to go to Egypt? She had to trust him. She didn't know. How did Joseph know? He was supposed to stay and he wasn't supposed to. How did he know? There's all kinds of things that the Gospels show us that faith is freeing. And that type of scruple about what God wants me, I don't know. I think it's an excuse for pride, honestly. I think it's an excuse. Whenever we find ourselves not loving and being validated for our lack of love and our lack of action, I think that right in there, there's a pride. It's a very humiliating thing to put yourself out there, to try, and to not know. But to say, you know what, I might not know about whether it's God's will, but I know this. I really desire to please him by this action. And there's that prayer from Thomas Merton, a line from one of his prayers that I like, even though Thomas Merton, of course, is questionable in many ways. He's a beautiful line. He says, help me to remember, dear God, that the desire to please you does, in fact, please you. And that's where I would leave.
Awesome, Father. Well, we're at our final minutes of our time together. One last question for you, or at least an invitation, is, for those of who are watching this or listening to it on the podcast, who are concerned about the times in which we live. I mean, we're living in a time where there's the level of uncertainty is greater than it ever has, especially when it comes to economic, financial, whatever they may be. That it's almost dictated by health mandates, those kinds of things that like people have to make big choices. And one of the biggest things is fear of, well, I don't know what else I could do. How could I realign my whole life? And what word of encouragement can you give to them who basically, they're almost being forced to consider an entrepreneurial path? In other words, would you rather have the risks that come in your hands and that freedom that God can bless and give you and equip you and what you'll become in that process, versus trying to cling on to anything that seems attached to a cliffside that's going to, keep you dangling? But your life is never going to, it's not only is it not going to be fulfilled, but you don't know if day to day anymore if you could even have a job. So like this whole thought of entrepreneurship, what could you say to those who are for the first time maybe hearing this message?
All great businesses began by entrepreneurs. Why not be one? Entrepreneurship seems like a subculture, but actually it's a very foundational idea. St. Joseph was an entrepreneur. Jesus Christ was an entrepreneur. Who hired Jesus to fix roofs? Do you think he belonged to the roofingcompany.com at Nazareth? He was a tradesman, which means he was an entrepreneur. It's a very foundational thing. Now, some people might not have what it takes in today's world to make that work. They might be legitimately afraid of it. But I think this, with God, all things are possible. I don't think entrepreneurship is the only pathway. I'd like to go even more foundational with it and say, at the foot of the cross, the Virgin Mary had absolutely nothing to ratify her belief that Jesus would rise from the dead and that God was in charge and greater than evil. There was no evidence whatsoever, a simple choice that she made to believe no matter what. And I think when we get all nervous about the world, you can be justified in being nervous, and you can lock yourselves into a sterile fear with all the justifications in the world. But I think there's a power greater than those justifications, which is your power to believe. And there it's very scary and very hard. I understand. Holiness is scary and hard. But to choose to believe, no matter what, that God is going to show you a path forward, that God is in control, and that God wins, will motivate you to find just the next step. You might not be able to find the whole path. You only have to take the next step and let God lead you step by step through a difficult passage. I think we all wish we didn't have to suffer before we died. We all wish that the world was perfect. But this is our world and our pathway to heaven. And rejoice because Jesus walks it with you.
Awesome. Well, 30 seconds, Father. Final words I'm going to give over to you. What last message would you like to give to our audience?
Dare great things for Christ. Dare him. This is not the time to be quiet. If we're quiet, the enemy wins. After the enemy wins, go out and make noise, folks. Stop saying how small you are and start telling the world how big your God is. Because he has given you a spirit that's indomitable. And if you let that spirit loose, your life will be a hymn of glory to him. And that's what we're all supposed to be doing. Dare great things.
Awesome. Makes me think of St. Irenaeus, the glory of God is man fully alive. Well, Father, before we go, tell us, how can people find you? How can they learn more about the St. John Institute? Guide them how they can learn more.
One website's got it all, and that's stjohninstitute.org. SAINT, all written out, johninstitute.org. It's got everything that you want to find on there. We also have our own podcast called Dare Great Things for Christ. You can subscribe to that and listen. It's a great way to start to get to know the ministry.
Great. Well, we were a little bit garbled there, so I'm just going to repeat some of that. You can go to stjohninstitute.org. That's the site that's got everything, all the sub and surrounding ministries of Eagle Eye Ministries as well. And that's SAINT, johninstitute.org. And then you also, Father Nathan has an awesome podcast, Dare Great Things. So check that out as well. You can just go to Apple Podcasts and others, and you'll find it pretty easy. So make sure you subscribe to them. And if you are in the Denver area, go check them out. They're not too far. Father can give you probably more when you get closer to that place. But there's a great launching point of those things. Father, thank you so much for joining us today. Talk about wisdom. You gave us a lot to think about and pray about, and more than anything, to move us to take the steps that we need to, because we will never get our time back. And every time that we waste, every moment is a minute waste. So thanks, Father. God bless you. And we will hopefully have you back sometime in the near future if we can ever get into your schedule again. So thanks again.
All the best, Peter.
All right. God bless you. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode for the Catholic Patriot. And I hope that there's a lot of things that you're going to be taking to prayer. Hopefully you're taking notes. Go back and watch it. I know the audio and the video got jumbled at times, but I think that in those moments we can still make those out. But please go to check out what Father Nathan's doing, especially when he has opportunities for excursions and adult formation. It's had a big impact on my own life, on my wife, my own family. So check that out. And once again, if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and also our Rumble channel, which is where we're able to place our podcasts that have anything that would normally be censored. So you'll find everything on Rumble and most things on YouTube. So subscribe to those, hit the bell so you get notified every single time. And I can't wait to see you guys on the next episode of The Catholic Patriot.
Right is right if nobody is right. Wrong is wrong if everybody is wrong. And believe me, in this error-infested world, what we really need is a church and an authority that is right not when the world is right, but one that is right when the world is wrong.
Never in history has the prayer of the Rosary been more needed to save our families, our countries, and defeat the evils of the world than now. The Fulton Sheen Institute worked closely with Aroma Rosary to develop the most unique, beautiful, and meaningful rosary that was inspired by Fulton Sheen's World Mission Rosary. This special handcrafted rosary continues Sheen's passion to support the mission of the Church to evangelize the entire world. Each decade of the rosary has a different color, which corresponds with a different continent. Yellow for Asia, red for the Americas, white for Europe, blue for the nations of Oceania, and green for Africa. Each Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary comes with a set of 4 pure essential oil blends that have been chosen for their therapeutic and theological significance. These blends correspond to the 4 mysteries of the Rosary. Simply choose the oil for the mystery of the day, drop a small drop in the palm of your hand, and massage the oil over the surface, being sure to catch the lava beads. You're good to go, and your prayer will linger longer with these beautiful aromatic notes. Every Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary you purchase supports our mission to fight the battle for the hearts and souls of the Christian family and lead our world back to God. So visit the Fulton Sheen Institute's store and pick up your beautiful Fulton Sheen Aroma Rosary today. One for you, your family members, your close friends, and don't forget your pastor. Thank you so much for your prayers and your support.